What's happening, everybody? I feel like this camera's off a little bit. That might be a little better. Welcome to another episode of Facemask Fantasy. And for the first time this off season, we have rankings for you. So I went ahead and pinned those. I was trying to numerically rank them, but the YouTube chat isn't really conducive to that. So I had to just kind of had to wing it. But they are there for your viewing pleasure. In years past, when we had done rankings, I kind of just was going through them one at a time, and there was no real crutch to lean on from a visual perspective. So I decided to change that up a little bit and give you guys my 1 to 12 rankings that you could physically visualize, assess, take it in, agree, disagree. That's what the discourse is for. That's what these streams are for, to have a conversation about where we stand on certain players. And we can get a little bit into the nitty-gritty today with these guys. Hopefully everybody's July is off to a good start. We'll do the formalities first and foremost with the holiday week coming up. Hopefully everybody's got an opportunity to take some time, whether that's away from work or school or whatever's going on in your life. Hopefully there's an opportunity, time to relax and hang out later this weekend into the weekend. So before that all happens, before that all goes down, wanted to get my first rankings out for the 2024 season, at least for redraft. We are shifting to redraft, coverage between March and May, maybe March to June is a little bit more dynasty focused, but I always kind of consider the 4th of July as that kind of page turner in the offseason where we do start to really focus on strategy and planning for the upcoming season and not just years to come in dynasty formats. This is when people start to focus on redraft, turn the page, and start to think about this season in particular. So we can get into that today. Videos will still be, there will be a dynasty angle to them in addition to a redraft angle, specifically when I go over any rookies, any thoughts on the incoming class. That'll have a dynasty and a redraft angle. Anything else will probably have strictly a redraft angle. With pretty much just 2 months until the season begins. These will be subscriber-only mode chats. So if you are subscribed to the channel, I only have it set up to have, you only have to have been subbed to the channel for 5 minutes or longer to send messages. I have read that this can sometimes be a bit of a buggy feature. So, if you happen to be in my Discord and you're in here and you see this, if you're having any issues with the chat, let me know in Discord. I can try to toggle the setting so that folks can comment. But the idea here is that the subscribers do get the opportunity to chat with me. Members will get the shout outs. And then, of course, there are levels to members being a member of the channel. There are perks involved there as well. I have that in the description of this live stream and all of the videos on the channel if you want to learn a little bit more. But without further ado, we can go ahead and talk shop on on this year's quarterback rankings. What's going on, Nemo? Good to see you, man. Thanks for coming in. Let's kick it off. As always, Josh Allen is typically the consensus QB1. That has been pretty much like a staple for the past 3 or 4 years now. Deservedly so, rightfully so. He was the QB1 from weeks 1 to 17 last year. As far as points per game, total points scored, he was the quarterback one once again. Ho-hum, right? I don't have him as QB1 this year, though. That goes to Jalen Hurts this year. And again, I'm not gonna in years past with rankings, I kind of went like, okay, number 1 is Josh Allen, and here's why. Number 2 is Jalen Hurts. Here's why. I'll do that a little bit, but I wanted to give you guys a visual opportunity to look at where I have guys. So that's pinned in the chat. I wish I could number them, but there is a character limit for YouTube, for adding YouTube chats in. And I didn't want to flood the chat with just like 12 individually pinned messages from me. You guys get the idea. You can read left to right, and figure out the rankings from there. And of course, I will, number 1, number 2, we'll still go down that list. But this allows me to kind of bounce around a little bit because you guys can visualize where I have these guys in order. Jalen Hurts 1, Josh Allen 2, Patrick Mahomes 3, Lamar Jackson 4, Anthony Richardson 5, CJ Stroud 6, Kyler Murray 7, Joe Burrow 8, Jaden Daniels 9. That might be a little bit of that might be the wow factor of this, of these rankings. Jordan Love I have at 10, Caleb Williams I have at 11. So I got 2 rookies who haven't even taken a snap in the NFL yet, both in the top 12. We'll get into that. Trevor Lawrence rounds out the top 12. I'm sure there are going to be several people thinking, where's last year's QB4 overall? I think he was the QB4 overall, the QB5 in points per game. Where the hell is Dak Prescott? He did just make the cut, miss the cut, excuse me. I do have him as my QB13. So, he's in that low-end QB1 conversation, high-end QB2 conversation, still perfectly suitable, still perfectly reasonable guy to hang your hat on. Obviously more valuable in Superflex, but in one quarterback league, still a guy that you could, conceivably lean on. He still has CeeDee Lamb to throw the football to. Threw for a ton of passing yards last year. I left him out ultimately because the overall cast of characters around him is worse than it has been in recent history, recent years. And also, feel free to disagree with this, but the vibes on the Cowboys right now, they just don't feel that good. Right? They've been the butt of a lot of jokes about not doing anything in free agency this year. They didn't add really any impact skill position guys through the draft. And their offensive line is expected to be worse this year. They get a tackle, Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma with their first overall pick. But, he's a rookie. We have to see how that plays out before we crown him as a guy who can step in and be an impact starter day one. So on top of that, you got guys. It's Dak, it's CeeDee Lamb, and it's Micah Parsons, all looking for new contracts. With Dak and CeeDee being the most immediate, the Cowboys have time on Parsons. He's not going to be a free agent, or in theory, he couldn't hit the market until next year. So they have time to sort that out. But he wants more money. CeeDee Lamb wants more money and, wants a new deal. And Dak Prescott's contract is up at the end of the year, and he's looking to get re-upped. And the Cowboys haven't acted on any of those players. But watch the rest of the league take action. Trevor Lawrence just signed a fat contract extension. Dak Prescott's a better football player than Trevor Lawrence, but the Jags committed to Trevor Lawrence. Dak has got to be sitting there thinking, what the hell do I got to do? And now, obviously, the scrutiny is the lack of playoff success. But Dak, at least over the course of the regular season, has proven to be a guy that he's a better quarterback right now than Trevor Lawrence. But Lawrence got the money. Lawrence got the money. Dak hasn't. Dak hasn't gotten paid. CeeDee Lamb is looking to get paid. That hasn't happened. Micah Parsons is looking to get paid. These are just like the overall vibes of the Cowboys, not just like looking at them from an offense perspective for fantasy. But they didn't do anything in free agency. You got CeeDee Lamb potentially considering a holdout at a camp. The vibes on the Cowboys are just not very good right now. So you can take a look at my rankings. I have them pinned. There might be some people wondering, where's Dak Prescott? He was the QB4 overall last year. He was the QB5 in points per game. There's your answer. In typical in default scoring, Dak Prescott was a top 5 quarterback for fantasy last year. Yet he is absent from my top 12 rankings. So that's the thought process there. I just wanted to kind of set that precedent as to why I do not have Dak included in the top 12. Trevor Lawrence sneaks in over him because Trevor Lawrence, Dak takes care of the football better than Trevor Lawrence. But Trevor Lawrence, this isn't like a real, I know I always caveat stuff like this, but this isn't a real football conversation. This is a fantasy conversation. Trevor Lawrence, from a rushing production perspective, is more valuable than Dak Prescott. Lawrence has run, I think in his 3 years as a starter, Lawrence's low watermark for rushing yards in a season is like 290. He just missed 300 by like 10 yards, I think, in his second season in 2022. He's cleared 300 yards rushing in his other 2 seasons, his rookie year and last year, and has like 10 or 11 touchdowns over the course, 10 or 11 rushing touchdowns over the course of those 3 seasons. He's just more valuable as a runner. And for me, that's, between the vibes of the Cowboys and Lawrence's legs being more trustworthy than Dak's, he gets the nod. Dak's a better real-life quarterback. Dak does a little bit better of a job protecting the football than Trevor Lawrence does. But Lawrence, on paper, especially coming into this season where the vibes of the Dallas Cowboys are not where they typically are, where you expect them to be, I have Lawrence sneaking in over Dak Prescott in addition to a couple of rookies like Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. So what's going on, Alex? Good to see you, man. Thanks, guys, for coming in and hanging out. So again, the top 12, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, who I'm very bullish on at cost this year. These are just like the arbitrary rankings. I'll give you guys the names from this group who I'm very bullish on at cost, who I'm targeting at their ADP for the 2024 season. So just because I have Jalen Hurts ranked number 1, does that mean I'm targeting him? I'll get into that. Patrick Mahomes 3, Lamar Jackson 4, Anthony Richardson 5, CJ Stroud 6, Kyler Murray 7, Joe Burrow 8, Jaden Daniels 9, Jordan Love 10, Caleb Williams 11, Trevor Lawrence 12. Why do I have Josh Allen ranked 2? We'll start at the very top. Why do I have Josh Allen ranked 2 behind Jalen Hurts when Josh Allen was the QB1 last year? Anybody who has paid attention knows what took place in Buffalo over the course of the offseason. Josh Allen lost his number 1 wide receiver. I could throw Gabe Davis in there as well, but not as big of an impact player. We all know that. Stephon Diggs I know he had a real dry spell. He did not end the 2023 season well. I think his last touchdown that he caught was like in week 10 or 11. Nevertheless, Stephon Diggs has been a bona fide stud wide receiver 1 pretty much since he got to Buffalo. Now he's in Houston. And for what it's worth, they also lose Gabe Davis. They still have what looks to be an ascending talent at tight end in Dalton Kincaid. James Cook has proven to be a solid running back. Curtis Samuel has been a solid contributor throughout his career. He's the one who is in. Out is Stephon Diggs, out is Gabe Davis, in is Curtis Samuel. Khalil Shakir looks enticing, and they drafted Keon Coleman high. They spent premium resources to draft Keon Coleman. Second pick of the second round was Keon Coleman, I think. Yeah. So damn near a day one pick, just missed out on being a first rounder by a pick or two. The Bills thought enough of him to take him 33rd overall. He steps in and could potentially be a starter day one. And given the losses that Buffalo are dealing with, probably should be a starter alongside Curtis Samuel. Khalil Shakir probably is their slot guy. You figure he maybe takes a step forward in his third season. And then, of course, the Bills probably run a decent amount of two tight end sets this year with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, who I love as a last round flyer at tight end. Dawson Knox has proven to be a decent, red zone threat over the course of his career. I think he could get back to that once again this year. So there are decent weapons in Buffalo, but that bona fide stud that you can hang your hat on in Stephon Diggs is gone. Jalen Hurts lost a key piece as well. He lost his starting center, right? Everybody knows who Jason Kelce is. Not everybody can name every center on every team, but everybody knows who Jason Kelce is. Pretty much has cemented a legacy as like the best of all time at the position, or at the very least up in that conversation. So he loses a key piece on his offensive line. The quarterback of the offensive line, right? The center is the one who obviously not just gets the ball to the quarterback, but is calling out the signals, reading the defense with the rest of the offensive line, helping the quarterback at the line of scrimmage adjust the play if necessary. And Jason Kelce was a huge reason for why the Eagles have been so successful with the tush push. So I understand, Josh Allen lost Stephon Diggs, but Jalen Hurts lost Jason Kelce. That's true. And that's going to be a difficult void to fill for the Eagles. But they still have good pieces along the offensive line. And maybe more importantly, just from a fantasy perspective, Hurts does A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. He didn't lose his stud wide receiver like Josh Allen did. Hurts and Allen have pretty much been like 1 and 2 for the past 3 seasons. Your Allen goes 1, Hurts goes 2 from the quarterback position. That's pretty much been the MO for the past 2 years, for 3 years even, and deservedly so. Josh Allen was the QB1 last year. I mentioned that. Hurts was about 15 points behind him on the season and only scored like a point per game fewer than Allen from weeks 1 to 17. They are as automatic as automatic gets at the quarterback position. They are regularly top 5 options every single week. You can hang your hat on these guys knowing that they will give you a QB1 performance probably around 60 to 65% of the time. That is automatic. That is as automatic as it gets. I think Mahomes over the past 3 seasons is third, but like he's down in the 40 to 45% range. It's just not the same consistency because he doesn't run as much as Allen and Hurts. So Allen and Hurts, you could flip a coin. There's still not enough has happened to take those two out from the top 2. Hurts lost Kelce, Allen lost Diggs and Gabe Davis, but Allen is still excellent and is still an elite runner. Maybe he runs a little bit more in this offense now, which the Bills probably don't want. But there's going to be probably more situations on a play-by-play basis where they don't have a choice. No disrespect to Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman, but none of those guys are Stephon Diggs. Newsflash. So Allen might not be able to rely on his guys as frequently to get open as he was able to with Diggs. So maybe he does run a little bit more. That keeps his floor super high, and he's just still an awesome quarterback in a vacuum, regardless of the personnel around him. So he's still up there. He's top two. He's still a high, firmly above 3. But I'll take Hurts 1 overall over Allen. Allen is being drafted over Hurts according to ADP, according to Underdog Fantasy. Allen has a slight lead over Hurts as far as cost, but I would rather take Jalen Hurts. Now, that being said, in one quarterback leagues, as great as both of those guys are, there are some guys in this field that I like at cost. Therefore, I feel like I could skip over Hurts, skip over Allen, and get pretty damn good value at the quarterback position at a little bit cheaper of a cost. I'll start with Mahomes. I have Mahomes as my QB3 on the season. And Mahomes did not have a good fantasy season last year. He was the QB3 being drafted, but if you ended up with Mahomes, you were, he left a lot to be desired. Yeah, he was the QB7 on the season. He played every game, so that's important. He was the QB7 on the year, but on a points per game basis, I think he was like closer to the QB12. He was a low end QB1. The numbers were there at the end of the day because he played every game, which is great. That's important. But, in standard scoring, he started off well. Week 1, 20 points. Week 2, 22 points. Week 3, 25.7, so almost 26 points. And then there was a stretch where he was leaving you wanting more. 15 points week 4, 19 points week 5, 18 points week 7. That's not a guy that you wanted to draft QB3 overall. He did blow up week 7. He had like a 35 burger, but he didn't come anywhere close to that the rest of the season. He bottomed out week 8, 7.5 points, 16 points week 9, 18 points week 11, 20, 14, 14, and then 18, 18, 12 in the fantasy playoffs. So he did okay for you weeks 15 and 16. He didn't win you the week, which is where when you draft a guy top 3 at his position, you're expecting him. You're hoping that if you're in the playoffs, that guy can go out and just win you the week, ball out at the quarterback spot, give you a 25 burger, if not a little bit more, and give you a really strong floor to work with during the playoffs. Mahomes didn't do that last year. So why do I have him 3 overall? Well, first of all, he's still awesome, right? He's still the best quarterback in the NFL. Take fantasy out of it. He's still the best quarterback. But, his weapons got better. And that's why I was not super bullish on Mahomes last year. You have to give him his flowers because he's awesome, but I wasn't super bullish on him last year. This year I am. Last year, Mahomes was throwing to Kadarius Toney and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Obviously, Rashee Rice came into his own last year as a rookie and proved to be a rock-solid contributor, an upper echelon player with a bright future once he gets past this suspension that he's going to be slapped with in 2024. Needs to clean up the off-the-field crap. We don't need Rashee Rice racing cars. So hopefully that's the end of any off-field issues. But that aside, Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Kadarius Toney, that leaves a lot to be desired. Obviously, he still has the best tight end in football in Travis Kelce, but Kelce had a down year as well. I mean, defenses were able to do more to key on him because the wide receivers were just not a regular, consistent threat. MVS can run. He can get down the field. But he's not a difference maker at the position, not a consistent one anyway. And then Kadarius Toney, right, is, you know, looking like a lost cause. Now, other than Kelce and Rashee Rice, the team signs Hollywood Brown and they draft Xavier Worthy. That's it. The weapons got better. So now I think Mahomes' cost is a little more justified. And he's regularly being drafted after Lamar Jackson. Deservedly so. Lamar was all he was the MVP last year. But I think we see Mahomes get back to that level of fantasy production that we've come to expect from him. Right? I think we could comfortably feel better about Patrick Mahomes. His floor is typically pretty strong just because he's the best quarterback in the NFL. But now he's got the weapons to feel better about actually taking a shot on him in your drafts, in redraft leagues. I will say this, I think his ADP has climbed a little bit since the start of the offseason. I'm double checking Underdog now. Before my phone dies, I need to charge that. Mahomes' ADP is somewhere around 50. But like last year, it was 10 spots higher than that with worse weapons. Yeah, Mahomes' ADP is 49.5. So he's being taken about 4 or 5 picks on average behind Lamar Jackson. He's being taken about 8 picks ahead of Anthony Richardson, who was another guy that I really like at cost. But not a guy that we can rank over Mahomes just yet. My charger fell. So Mahomes is being drafted as the QB4. I have him as my QB3. No disrespect to Lamar Jackson. He's my QB4. He was, I think, the QB4 in points per game last year. If you eliminate Joe Flacco, who went nuclear for like a nice 4 or 5 game stretch, Lamar Jackson was the QB3 in points per game. And he was the QB3 in total points scored at the position. So I'm only knocking him down 1 spot. He's still my QB4. Lamar is still excellent. But because of the changes to the Chiefs' weapons, I'm back in on Mahomes at cost, who is now cheaper than he was last year. So I would guess I wouldn't necessarily call him a value because you still got to spend a top 50 pick on him to draft him. His ADP is around, again, 49 on Underdog Fantasy. But with the additions of Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy, he'll get Rashee Rice back, probably say week 7. We're probably looking at a 6. If I had to guess, we're looking at a 6-game suspension for Rashee Rice. Maybe it's 4, maybe it's 8. I'll split the difference and expect to be around a 6-game suspension. So when he comes back, now you're in mid-season, and instead of a 2023 version of the Chiefs offense where it was Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice as a rookie, Kadarius Toney and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, now it's Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy. That's much better. That's much better. So I'll take Mahomes. If he slides a little bit past that ADP, I feel great about taking shots on him. Cheaper than he was last year with a better supporting cast. He's my QB3, slightly over Lamar Jackson. But but he's being drafted behind Lamar Jackson. So by default, he's something of a value. But quarterbacks drafted in the top 50 of one quarterback drafts. And again, this is looking at best ball rankings. This is best ball ADP. So redraft ADP won't one-to-one automatically carry over. There will be some differences. But for anybody who likes to get a quarterback early, who likes to draft a stud quarterback early on, Mahomes is a guy worth targeting. He wasn't last year. He is in 2024. Lamar's my QB4. There's not a ton to say here. Hell of a floor, incredibly high with the rushing production. Gets a healthy Mark Andrews back, so that's good. Andrews missed a significant chunk of time in the second half of the season. Actually, I think he missed the entire, for fantasy purposes, he missed the entire second half of the season due to injury. So he gets him back. Emerging player in Zay Flowers. Emerging player also at tight end in Isaiah Likely. They add Derrick Henry to the backfield, who obviously is more of a pure runner than a receiver, but he's proven to be a solid receiver out of the backfield. He's not totally incapable. We'll see what Rashad Bateman can give them, if anything. But the weapons are good enough around Lamar Jackson, and obviously he's a threat any given year to go for 1,000 yards on the ground. So he was the QB3 in total points scored and in points per game last year when you can count the entire season and not just random stretches. So plenty enough reason to be in on Lamar. I'm not highlighting him necessarily as a target, though. He's going where he deserves to go. There's just other guys that I am targeting who are a little bit cheaper. Mahomes is one of them. Another guy on this list who is another target would be Anthony Richardson. He's my QB5 on the year. A lot of people have CJ Stroud ranked ahead of him, deservedly so. CJ Stroud had an historic rookie season. Looks to be an excellent quarterback for years to come. But I do have Anthony Richardson ranked ahead of him in my personal rankings. The ceiling is probably the highest of any of the top options at quarterback. We only saw him for about 4 games last year. He was in and out of the lineup with random injuries that he sustained while he was healthy, and then of course we lost him week 5, I think, to for the season. He's reportedly healthy now. And if you go big early at the quarterback position, he's the dude he's the swing for the fences pick. There's so many positives as far as his ceiling goes. Obviously, people are going to be deterred, scared off by the injuries. And there were a lot of them last year. But it's a good offensive line in Indianapolis. He's got a bona fide wide receiver 1 in Michael Pittman to throw the ball to. I like Josh Downs. They drafted Adonai Mitchell in the 2nd round. Jonathan Taylor is going to be there week 1. There's no holdout. There's no weird issues between Taylor and the team. He will be there week 1 from the word go, from the jump. That helps the offense. And then, of course, Richardson has QB1 overall upside because of his ability to run. ADP of about 57, 58 on Underdog Fantasy. So you have to spend a mid to late 5th round pick to get him. That's in best ball. He might be a little cheaper than that in redraft. One quarterback redraft leagues, he might be a little cheaper than that. But, I just mentioned CJ Stroud had an historic rookie season. Richardson on a per play basis, from at least a fantasy perspective, was also on pace for a remarkable, incredible season prior to the injury. It's abbreviated, obviously, because he only got through like 3 full games, but he was a low end QB1 in points per game in the games that he played, and that includes, of course, Week 5. He only scored 4.5 points. That's when he got knocked out early. Sustained the season-ending injury, was out for the year, but Week 1, his first start, 22 points. Week 2, 17.7, so almost 18 points. He didn't play Week 3, but then he had a 29.6 burger in his third career game. All he has to do is stay on the field. All he has to do is stay on the field. The sky is the limit for Anthony Richardson. He's an outstanding roll of the dice, swing for the fences pick at quarterback. Most rankings I've seen have CJ Stroud over him, and deservedly so after the season that he had. But I'm banking on the upside. I don't have eyes on 2023. I have eyes on 2024. If Anthony Richardson's injuries are behind him, he has the skill set and the supporting cast to put up a QB1 overall season. He is electric. All he has to do is stay healthy. You see him going sooner than that. So, okay. So around maybe an ADP of like somewhere between 50 to 55. You're going to have to spend let's just say an early 5th round pick if you want to secure him. Hell, if you end up with Michael Pittman at the end of the 3rd, I don't even know that I'm totally opposed to being aggressive and just grabbing Anthony Richardson in the 4th and just stack it up. Because where I've seen Michael Pittman's ADP is in the 30s, like early 30s, 30, 31, 32 on Underdog Fantasy. It might be a little higher than that in standard redraft. But if you can get Pittman, say 28, 29, 30 range, screw it. Like, consider Richardson in the 4th round. Stack it up and swing for the fences. I don't hate it. I'm not opposed to it in that specific scenario. He's QB5. CJ Stroud's QB6. Again, historic rookie season. Looked like the truth. Looks like an excellent quarterback for years to come. Loaded group of wide receivers. Maybe the best trio of wide receivers in the NFL. Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. They add Joe Mixon, who he's getting long in the tooth, but he's a better football player than Devin Singletary. No disrespect to Devin Singletary. He had a really good season once he got inserted as the starter. But I don't think you would get a ton of argument. Joe Mixon for his career is a better player and a rock solid pass catcher out of the backfield. I haven't even mentioned Dalton Schultz, who is an above average. That might be selling him a little short. He's a good tight end. This is a great supporting cast that CJ Stroud has to work with. Can he do it again in his sophomore season now that he's no longer a surprise? That will be the tricky test. But Stroud was, I think he was 10th in points per game with about 18 and a half. And in total points, he just missed being he just missed being a QB1 for the year. He was the QB 13 in standard scoring on the season. So his ADP is actually, the projection of another step forward is actually already baked into CJ Stroud's ADP. So while we are high on CJ Stroud, everybody and everybody should be, there's no reason to be out on CJ Stroud, but we are drafting him at his ceiling this year. He's being drafted as the QB5 or QB6. Again, deservedly so. But he wasn't the QB5 or QB6 last year. He was like the QB13 in total points per game, and he was around the QB10 or 11. He was the QB13 in overall points scored, and he was the QB10 or 11 in points per game. So drafters are drafting on a curve with CJ Stroud, expecting him to take another step forward, which is fair. He probably will. He probably should. The supporting cast got better, and he was awesome last year. There's no reason to believe he won't continue to get better. But now we're drafting him at his ceiling. So I'm not out on CJ Stroud. There's just other guys around him that I like a little bit more, so I'm not really ending up with too many shares of him. I'm not suggesting don't draft him. If you believe in CJ Stroud, and again, there's no reason not to, then take him. Draft him. Especially if you end up with Nico Collins or Tank Dell or Stephon Diggs. Stack it up. I'm not off CJ Stroud. It's just that we're drafting him at his ceiling currently. And there are runners in Richardson and Kyler who are getting drafted a little bit before him, or I think they're both getting drafted after. Well, Kyler's certainly getting drafted after him. But Richardson, depending on the format, might be getting drafted after him as well. And those guys, given the skill set and the cost, are guys I like a little bit more. That's it. I love CJ Stroud. I was calling for Stroud over Bryce Young last year. I thought he should have been the QB1. I thought I had the opportunity in dynasty rookie drafts, I would have taken Stroud over Bryce Young. I wasn't in a situation anywhere to make that happen. I'm not saying I predicted that Stroud would be as good as he was last year that quickly, but he proved that he should be pretty damn good 12-year vet in this league. I see no reason why that can't happen. But now, subsequently, with the improved supporting cast, we are drafting him at his ceiling. And I think there are some other guys where we're kind of drafting them at their floor, like Richardson. And that's the direction I'm generally going. Those are the top 6, though. And I really don't think that, should be argued because there is a drop-off after Stroud. On Underdog Fantasy, Kyler Murray's going about 15 picks later than him. Joe Burrow is going almost 25 picks later than Stroud. And then it's Dak, Jordan Love, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams. So there is a drop-off after Stroud. Make no mistake. If you miss out on Stroud, I would consider Stroud, despite what I said about I'm not really ending up with him because we're drafting him at his ceiling, and I'm more likely to try to find the values. Nevertheless, those are the tier 1s. Hurts, Allen, Mahomes, Lamar, Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud, those are the tier 1s. Kyler starts the tier 2s. And I will say, Kyler and Joe Burrow both have the upside to end up in the QB1 tier. Burrow is a real-life QB1, tier. I don't know that I don't know how many quarterbacks I would rather have over Joe Burrow other than Patrick Mahomes in the NFL. You can argue Lamar, 2-time MVP. Burrow hasn't done that. But just from a real-life perspective, Burrow and Jalen Hurts have both been to a Super Bowl. Burrow has big-time playoff wins on the road. He's a gamer, and he's a big-time gamer in big games. But he picked up the injury last year. there's a little bit of, what are the vibes are kind of meh with the Bengals right now because T. Higgins didn't want to get slapped with the franchise tag. So, what happens with T. Higgins? He's going to be playing out the string this year without a long-term deal. And I love T. Higgins, but like we see this happen a lot with players who are disgruntled with the franchise tag. What happens if it's week 11 or week 12 and Higgins has some little nagging injuries? My hamstrings like tweaked that a little bit. My ankle's bothering me. My shoulder's a little sore. Like we've seen players on the franchise tag make these business decisions before, and then that lowers the ceiling of a guy like Joe Burrow if something like that comes to fruition. So for now, he's in the QB2 tier for fantasy purposes, but we know what Burrow is capable of. We know he's capable of throwing for 4,500 yards and 30 plus scores. He's done it twice in his career, in his short career already. The thing with Burrow that will be interesting is what can we expect from him on the ground? In 2022, Burrow was an elite quarterback as far as, rushing production, not just throwing it, but running it as well. In 2022, he had 250 rushing yards and he ran for 5 scores. Last year in 10 games, he had 88 yards on the ground. So like Burrow is my QB8 because like what are we getting from him on the ground? I know that he can sling it for 4,500 yards and 35 touchdowns. I know Burrow can do that. I expect Burrow to do that. What are we getting from him on the ground? He was on pace for fewer than 200 rushing yards last year. And, Burrow can climb the pocket and extend plays if he has to. He'll run if, out of an absolute necessity. But obviously, we all know he's not a running quarterback. 257 on the season is his high watermark. In his other 2 years, only 10 games played as a rookie, but 140 rushing yards. 16 games played in his sophomore season, 118 rushing yards. And that was coming back, at least the beginning of the season, he was working his way back for the first time from the injury he suffered as a rookie. I think it was torn ACL, right? Burrow tore his ACL like week 11 or so as a rookie. So, what is Joe Burrow's ceiling on the ground? I don't know if we have that answer yet. But what we do know is we can't bank on it. So between that and the meh situation with T. Higgins, I have Burrow at my QB8. If you end up with Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, by all means, build the stack. Burrow is excellent. He's just a damn good quarterback. We know that. I'm just not going out of my way to target him for fantasy purposes. I love Joe Burrow. I love watching Joe Burrow play football. Burrow's awesome. That's not the conversation we're having, though. The question is factor in everything, the cost, the situation, the vibes, all of that. Do we want to invest in this guy for fantasy purposes? He's not expensive. His ADP is around 90 in one quarterback leagues on Underdog Fantasy, so you're not breaking the bank to get Joe Burrow. But there are some question marks that give me some pause. If I end up with Jamar Chase in the first round or T. Higgins in like the third round, maybe early fourth round, yeah, okay. All right. Burrow jumps up a little bit for me. He becomes more valuable to me, specifically for that draft. But in a vacuum, if I don't end up with Jamar Chase, especially Jamar Chase, to a lesser extent T. Higgins, but if I don't have Jamar Chase, and you're only getting Jamar Chase if you have like a top 4 or 5 pick in your draft, if I don't end up with Jamar Chase, I'm not going out of my way to draft Joe Burrow. Should it be a good return on investment? Yeah, probably. But I don't know what he gives you on the ground necessarily. And the situation with T. Higgins gives me a little bit of pause. He's my QB8 because he's a great quarterback. But that's kind of where the conversation ends for me. I expect him to bounce back. I expect the Bengals to be good. But from a purely fantasy perspective, Burrow's not a target for me. Kyler Murray, I would say it is more of an extent than Joe Burrow. Kyler Murray's a little bit more of a target. ADP of around 81 on Underdog Fantasy. So you're spending like a late 6th, early 7th rounder, maybe more of just a 7th round pick on Kyler Murray. Who we are getting a full season of. He missed the first, 9 weeks last year? Coming back from the torn ACL he suffered at the end of the 2022 season. But when Kyler came back, he was a low-end QB1 in points per game. He came back week 10. And all of the questions were all valid. What was Kyler going to look like as a runner coming back from a torn ACL in his first couple games back? He didn't light the world on fire, but he was still pretty good on a terrible Cardinals team. 18 points week 10, 22.7, almost 23 fantasy points week 11, 20 in week 12. Didn't have a good game week 13, 11.8. Not great. Bottomed out. Not good. Late week 14 bye. 15 points week 15, 20 points week 16, 24.7 championship week 17. If by some stroke of magic you had Kyler Murray and started him in the fantasy playoffs, and it cost nothing to draft him last year because his ADP was so dirt cheap because we knew he wasn't going to be starting the season because of the injury. But if you took that risk and held, or maybe there were shallow leagues where he was just flat out available and you picked him up late in the season and started him in the fantasy playoffs, especially week 17, he might have won you the week. He might have won you the chip. Now he's got a full offseason removed from the injury. He's going to start week 1, and they added Marvin Harrison 4th overall. Marvin Harrison Jr. I know y'all know, but to be specific. Kyler Murray as my QB7, that's a little bit more of an enticing target. 7th round pick for a guy who has proven that he can maintain. He hasn't done it for an entire season yet, but he can sustain top 5 production at the position. He's being drafted as the QB7. He's my QB7 just because you can't in good conscience put him over any of the other top 6 names. But there is a drop-off in ADP for Kyler Murray compared to the rest of the guys above him, ahead of him in the rankings. That makes him an intriguing value. He's healthy. They added a stud wide receiver at the top of the draft. Trey McBride came into his own last year and looks like a stud option at tight end. They've got interesting ancillary guys at wide receiver in Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch. They added Zay Jones, who was a pretty good contributor for a couple of years in Jacksonville. He gets added to the mix. This is a good collection of talent. And Kyler Murray is still a good runner. I like Kyler Murray at cost. I think he's a good value 80 picks into your draft with him being healthy and ready to go for week 1 of the season. So that's the top 8. The last 4, the final 4, QBs 9 through 12. Jaden Daniels, Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence. This is going to be a combination of, personal preference. Who do you believe in? What situation is your favorite? And what do you value? And when I say what do you value, like things like Jane Daniels is expected to be an electric runner, but Washington might not be good. Jordan Love is not expected. I mean, he can run. He is mobile. He's not expected to give you a ton on the ground. He can give you a decent amount on the ground, but not as much as what Jaden Daniels is expected to give you. But Jordan Love is in a much more stable situation with a much more stable franchise, with a deep collection of young ascending pass catching talent. Caleb Williams, the number one overall pick, the next supposed can't miss player at the position. Proved, in college, he has a cannon of an arm. Can run if he has to. It's not option A for him, but he can do it. The Bears surrounded him with talent at wide receiver. They have DJ Moore from the trade last year with the Panthers. They also added Keenan Allen, and they drafted Rome Odunze 9 overall, plus a solid tight end in Cole Kmet. The Bears did their job to surround Caleb Williams with solid talent to help support and boost him in his first year as a starter. But it's the Bears, right? Bears are notorious for ruining quarterbacks throughout the duration of their franchise's history, basically. They're the only team in the NFL that has never had a 4,000-yard passer in a season. That's well documented at this point. Blah, 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 right? All that good stuff. And then with Trevor Lawrence, he's my QB 12. He sneaks in again over Dak Prescott. I got a lot of questions about the Cowboys this year. That's why last year's QB 4 does not make the list, does not make the cut. I got into that at the beginning of the stream if you missed it. But Trevor Lawrence does make the cut because he is a pretty solid contributor as a runner on the ground. You can rely on Trevor Lawrence to give you 300 rushing yards and maybe 3 to 4, 4 to 5 rushing touchdowns a season because that's what he has done in his first 3 years in the league. Now he loses Calvin Ridley in free agency, right? But they still have Christian. Oh, he loses Zay Jones as well. Speaking of Zay Jones, he goes from one guy on this list to another. He loses Zay Jones. He loses Calvin Ridley, but he still has Christian Kirk. They added Gabe Davis, whatever that's worth. They still have Evan Ingram, who has played much better in Jacksonville than he did in New York. He's done much better with the Jaguars since moving there. They add Brian Thomas with their first-round pick. A lot of people are very high on him. He was a consensus top 5 receiver in the pre-draft process. And they still have a pretty good, they don't utilize him a ton in the receiving game, but Travis Etienne is a capable pass catcher out of the backfield. The pieces are there for Trevor Lawrence to succeed and put up numbers. But he doesn't, he turns the ball over. He hasn't proven that ball security is a strong suit of his. The Jags have fallen short of expectations each year. And Lawrence himself has been a little uninspiring with his play. So again, these last 4 spots are kind of a personal preference, but these are the guys who round out the top 12 for me. I know I kind of lumped them all into just one portion of the conversation, but again, it's like, what do you value? What do you yourself, the person on the board? I missed on all these other guys ahead of them. I missed on the top 8. And I do think after Kyler and Burrow, that is a definitive top 8 that I wouldn't, you can argue Jordan Love if you are if you're all in and bullish on him after the end of the season the Packers had. But I think Hurts, Allen, Mahomes, Lamar, Richardson, Stroud, Kyler, Burrow, that's the top 8 definitively. And then after that, it's kind of dealer's choice. It all depends on personal preference, like I said. Do you value the high upside with the rushing that Jaden Daniels brings, but maybe the overall supporting cast and the franchise in general gives you some pause? Jordan Love, on the other hand, is in a very stable situation with an ascending great collection of pass-catching talent. I like all of Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Dontavion Wicks, Luke Musgrave. That's a great group that he's going to be throwing the ball to. But He doesn't run as much. So what does that look like? Well, Jordan Love was the QB6 in overall points per game last year. He was the QB5 in total points scored. I mean, honestly, that's the guy I think who is probably pound for pound might be the best value of this group. He's not going to give you week winning weeks more than like a quarter of the time. You know, last year he played every game, so that helped with his overall finish as far as overall points scored and points per game. But week 5, 8 points. Week 9, a little under 15, 13.8 points. Week 14, under 10 points. But in the fantasy playoffs, he delivered for you. So Love is probably the value here. And, you know, maybe he's deserving of being over Jaden Daniels in the rankings. It depends on what you value. Depends on what you believe in as far as the rushing production versus the overall situation. And then Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, I have those guys 11 and 12. I don't think I would put either of those guys over Love. I could see putting Love over Jaden Daniels. But Daniels has crazy rushing upside, and so I preemptively put him 9th. So it's a little bit of projecting. But the rushing floor for Jaden Daniels is like astronomical. Yeah. So again, it depends on what you believe in. It depends on what you value. He had an easy schedule last year. That's a good, that's a good call, Nemo. The Packers they didn't have a first place schedule last year. So that certainly helped. But, do you believe in the talent? Do you believe in what he showed you in the playoffs on the road against Dallas? And they lost the game, but on the road against San Francisco, he looked impressive there as well. Not as impressive against Dallas, but still pretty good. So it just depends on what you value. You might like Caleb Williams' upside to run a little bit more, and therefore you like him a little bit higher. You might like Trevor Lawrence because his rushing upside is solid. He can give you 300 yards on the ground. He's done it every year except for one. He just missed it by about 10 yards. And Trevor Lawrence played through injuries last year. So maybe his performances on a game-per-game basis weren't as impressive because he was so banged up. He was playing through injuries. I think he had a bad knee injury that he was working through, especially toward the latter half of the of the season. So, do you feel more confident in a healthy Trevor? So this is like the personal preference bracket. I think between Hurts to Burrow, 1 through 8, I think that kind of has to be definitive. And then to round out the top 12, to round out the QB1s from QB9 to QB12, that's personal preference. Between what they give, what they provide as far as expectations, like where the production comes from, the situation they're in, and the supporting cast, that's where you kind of go ahead and I'm not going to definitively lock into like, you have to take Jaden Daniels over Jordan Love. You have to take Caleb Williams over Trevor Lawrence. That's where it becomes personal preference. And hell, there's probably more than, quite a few people who would still put Dak Prescott in their top 12, which All you have to say is he was the QB5 overall last year and the QB4 in points per game. That's a fair argument. Dak had a great year last year. How could you possibly leave him out of the top 12? And the drafters are actually that is an argument that the drafters would generally make on Underdog Fantasy. Dak is the QB9 being drafted over Jordan Love by about 3 spots, over Jaden Daniels by about 5 spots, over Caleb Williams by about 15 spots. But I've said my piece about Dak, why I left him out of my top 12. He just misses the cut as QB 13. And for the record, as far as like the other next man out, that would be Brock Purdy. Excellent player. I think he was the QB6 in overall points scored last year. That was Brock Purdy. He was more like the QB9 as far as points per game. So he didn't hurt you. Purdy's, nothing wrong with going with Purdy. I guess what would give me a little bit of pause there is on top of like who do we squeeze out? Who do we bump out from that list for Purdy? If you want to say Lawrence, okay, fine. If you want to say Caleb or Daniels because they haven't taken a snap yet, okay, fine. But what's the deal with Brandon Ayuk? So, every quarterback comes with their warts. It just, again, it's personal preference. There's going to be folks who have Brock Purdy in their top 12. There's going to be folks who have Dak Prescott in their top 12. There's probably a lot of people who have Dak Prescott in their top 12 because, again, on Underdog Fantasy, at least for best ball, the consensus is right now he's the QB9. He's being drafted within the top 100. So, so the drafters, the consensus has Dak Prescott in their top 12, in their top 10. For the reasons I mentioned earlier, I do not. I have him outside my top 12. He just misses the cut. The concerns with the vibes with the Cowboys. They didn't add a marquee name to the offense. In fact, they lost more than they gained. Not just along the offensive line, but skill position as well. Tony Pollard moves on. Michael Gallup moves on. There seems to be some people who are high on Jalen Tolbert and the progression that he has made throughout this offseason. We will see. But they lose a guy in the backfield in Tony Pollard. They lose pieces along the offensive line. CeeDee Lamb is reportedly considering a holdout of training camp. The vibes are just not good. And Dak is not really a runner anymore. He was at the beginning of his career, but now he's not. So, we need him to throw for 4,500 yards and 40 touchdowns. Maybe not 40. 30 is a little bit more reasonable of an ask for a quarterback of Dak's caliber. Not to say he can't throw for 40, but that's a high mark to expect of any quarterback any given year. But he's going to need to hit those numbers again. And I just don't know how confident I feel about that given everything that's going on in Dallas. So, again, one more time. Jalen Hurts, 1. Josh Allen, 2. Patrick Mahomes, 3. A guy I like at cost. Lamar Jackson, 4. Anthony Richardson, 5. A guy I like at cost. CJ Stroud at 6, Kyler Murray 7. He's a guy I like at cost. Joe Burrow at 8, Jaden Daniels 9, Jordan Love at 10. I like Love at cost. Caleb Williams 11, Trevor Lawrence 12. Those are the initial rankings that I have for the quarterbacks for the 2024 season. I will make sure to create tabs for this stream so that you can find if you want to retroactively go back and get my thoughts on each guy. If you missed anything or if you're looking for somebody specific, I'll timestamp the stream for your guys' convenience. I think that'll about do it for today. With the holiday on Thursday, I'll be off, but I can come back later in the week We can talk shop. And of course, next week we can get into more rankings for the running backs, the wide receivers, and the tight ends as we move through July. As a heads up, I will be sharing this heads up, for each stream that I do. The channel will have to go on hiatus for the duration of the Olympic Games because that is my full-time job. So I am traveling for the games. I wish I could say I was going to Paris, but I'm not. I'm traveling for work for the games, though. I will be pretty much unavailable for the duration of the games. I'll try to put out a short here and there, and I can be available in Discord for those who have the Discord link as I can. But availability will be limited during that time. I'll of course come back in August after those are over. Ready to rock and roll. It'll only be weeks till the season start at that point, but just as an FYI. If you like what you see from the channel, there are perks available with details about memberships. During the season, the start sit streams will be members only. You only have to do the lowest level memberships to be eligible for that. So that's 99 cents a month. That is half of a cup of coffee for 1 month to be able to ask questions in start sit streams, but they will be members only on Saturdays and Sundays when we get into the season. The next level up, you could get one-on-one sessions with me if you have a dynasty team to go over your team and get some personal thoughts, advice on where you stand and what you maybe want to consider doing, what direction you want to take your team in. And the highest tier, we'll set up a fantasy league. That will be your buy-in. Will be the membership. I will commission it. It would be on Sleeper. I would handle all of the commissioner duties, setting up the league and all of that stuff. Obviously, we don't have all the time in the world to get that set up. A little too late for anything other than probably just a standard, straightforward redraft league. But test your chops against me, against other members of the channel. We of course need a minimum of 10 folks. 9, I guess I should say, with myself included, to set up a league. I guess we could do a shallower league if we have 7 people, and then we can do an 8-person league, but we're going to need a minimum of 7 for any type of Facemask fantasy league if you want to test your mettle against me and the other members of this channel. So check it out if you're interested. But otherwise, everybody have a great holiday. Be safe. Have fun. I will be around for the rest of this week. I'll try to throw some shorts out here and there, get you guys a little bit more content before, as we head into the weekend and the holiday week in general. Everybody enjoy. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you later this week. Thanks, everybody.